Off to the races. The serious candidates are ready to take Detroit by storm and make a claim to be the city's next mayor. A closer look at the candidates now that the filing deadline has passed. We're also breaking down the state races as another big name emerged that could shake up Michigan's congressional landscape. Also this morning, Michigan's newest senator sits down for a conversation about tariffs, her old place of employment, and why she's going after China in the first bill she's introduced. It's Sunday, April 27th. This is Flashpoint.
And happy Sunday, everybody. I'm Jason Colthorpe. The deadline to file to be Detroit's next mayor was this past week, and several candidates submitted the required 500 signed petitions. Now we wait a couple of weeks for the clerk's office to certify those signatures to determine the official field. But we do have a pretty good idea of the serious contenders, and we're going to discuss that a little bit this morning with a pair of political experts. Of course, we have to cover what's happening at the state level as well, with the newest name to emerge in the Senate race. Haley Stevens' name isn't new, but her bid to take Gary Peters' seat is. It also means her current seat in the 11th district is now up for grabs next year. Is she now the current favorite in that race for Senate? Our experts weighing in on that as well. But first this morning, I had a chance to sit down with Senator Slotkin this week. If you follow her on social media, you know she had some things to say, and with some language that we can't show you on TV. That was pertaining to the situation at the Defense Department. But we started with her first bill, now introduced as she hits 100 days on the job. I saw you introduced a bill.
My first official bill in the Senate.
And this is about limiting Chinese automobiles into the U.S. Is this something where you're concerned China could be spying on Americans via their vehicle?
Oh, yes. I mean, the truth is, we all know that every vehicle is deeply connected now. It's collecting data and 3D mapping and LiDAR and geolocation, and they send all that data back to Beijing, right?
Yeah.
It's the Chinese companies have a relationship, a deep relationship with the government. So think about video of our military bases or sensitive infrastructure sites, geolocation of specific leaders. I don't want that data going back to Beijing. It would be a huge advantage as someone who did war planning in my former job to have a up-to-date 3D mapping of all the sensitive sites of China. That would be interesting information for the military to have.
I never thought about it the way you just described, but it's almost like every car produced is its own little spy in the United States.
Yes, except that American companies are subject to American law, and European countries are subject to European law.
Which will outlaw all of that sort of activity.
And just if you used it for nefarious purposes, you could be held accountable. I can't do that with the Chinese.
Of the Michiganders you've talked to, how have they said they've been affected by tariffs, at least thus far, and what industries are you seeing are most affected?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I was up in Port Huron yesterday just talking to the folks on the border. So there's no doubt about it. We've seen a decrease in tourism traffic from Canada into Detroit, into Port Huron, into Sault Ste. Marie. And that's just a fact. The rest of it, on truck traffic, all that trade, a lot of it is just the uncertainty right now. Everyone I know has a level of uncertainty that reminds me of COVID. You know, business owners, do I invest and go forward with that new building or do I not? Do I hire more people or do I not? There's just that unknown right there. And I think particularly since we're a manufacturing state, if Washington coughs, we get a cold. We really feel it here. So right now, I think it's still anticipatory concerns, but it's a very real level of uncertainty, and it means people aren't hiring, they're not building, they're not doing those planned expansions.
Speaking of manufacturing jobs, I think it's the last 6 years Michigan has lost 27,000 manufacturing jobs. Unemployment's up for the 12th straight month in the state, up to 5.5%. Isn't it fair to say Trump tariffs could help Michigan?
I mean, I think the theory of the case, right, is that you make things more expensive here that come from abroad, and so it incentivizes buying American. The only problem is that works for China, right? That makes sense for China, who's a potential adversary, undercutting us, cheating in the international system. treating Canada like China is kind of a sloppy slapstick approach to it. And I understand being targeted, but that's not what this is, especially on again, off again. So in theory, you make everything more expensive now, and we live through a lot of pain, maybe even a recession, with the goal of coming out the other side of the rainbow with some success, right? More Michigan manufacturing. But right now, the pain has to be worth it, and that sloppy across the board approach does not allow for a targeted plan that I can see.
As a former CIA officer who's worked in the Pentagon,
yeah.
We sit here as we tape this midweek. Pete Hegseth, still the head of the Department of Defense, but
yeah.
What are you hearing about maybe from former colleagues within the Pentagon, including after one of them who was dismissed called what's happening there total chaos?
Yeah, we've been hearing whispers of this in Washington, just that it's a complete mess over there. And it's just, it's the military. Like, it deserves serious leadership, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I don't care. Just be a serious person who sets the example from the top. And any one of us who would have shared, sensitive operational material on our phone and on a chat, shared it with family members and my own personal lawyer, I'd be fired. As a CIA officer, it's not even a question. They'd probably refer me to the Department of Justice for a criminal investigation. So,
is that what you're saying should happen to Pete Hegseth?
No, I think first of all, the first thing you do is man up and say, look, I made a mistake, right? I shouldn't have put it on there. It was a mistake. I'm not going to do it again. And own it, because he is the commander-in-chief of the Pentagon, setting the example for all the millions of people who are watching him. So that's number one. Number two, once you've stopped doing that bad behavior of sharing something that could be sensitive to operations in the Middle East, then you put controls in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. But if it keeps happening like this, there isn't already an IG investigation, Inspector General, that's bipartisan, right? Democrats and Republicans said that should happen. So just own it, you know what I mean? Just say you'd made a mistake and fix it.
Does it, and obviously this is what worries us within the United States and within our government. What is the signal to adversaries, by the way, when this happens?
Watch everybody's phones, hack everybody's phones, because you never know what kind of gold mine you'll get. And I think the thing that people missed about putting that sensitive information on there is, like, that's someone's husband, someone's dad, who's on those ships at Yemen, right outside of Yemen, who's now, the information of the time and place of that attack was put on the open internet, what kinds of weapons they're going to use. I would never want that information out there. So it put people at risk. So to me, it is just, it's an example, again, of the sloppiness that I think just is not deserved by the Department of Defense.
On immigration in Michigan, we haven't really seen major ICE raids here yet, but obviously Michigan has an incredibly diverse immigrant population. Do you expect that to change, where we might see more activity in Michigan? Well,
I'm on the Homeland Security Committee, so I was up in Port Huron yesterday. We're here in Detroit talking to some of the folks from DHS about kind of what they're seeing and hearing to try and get ahead of it. I hope not, right? I hope that we don't see people grabbed off the street, right? I hope we don't see mistakenly American citizens getting letters like they're getting in other parts of the country saying, Joe, American citizen, you got to leave the country. No American citizen can be forced to leave this country. So to me, I am hoping that cooler heads prevail, but we also have to have accountability. This administration doesn't get to do everything that they want. There are 3 branches of government, and right now, the Trump administration, they'll own it. They're ignoring the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court said, you deported a man without due process, bring him back. His wife's an American citizen, his children are American citizens. Bring him back and just let him have his day in court. And they're ignoring that. So we're going to have this conversation, because our Constitution has 3 branches of government.
Yeah. I did notice something from the National Democratic Party this week, that they're threatening to target moderate congressional Democrats in blue districts to replace them with reps who are more liberal, far more left. And you've campaigned on being someone who's worked for a Republican president and Democratic president. What do you make of that strategy? Do you agree with that strategy?
To me, I think I have deep concerns about what this administration is doing. I have made no bones about that. That's just, to me, not that strategic.
So you don't think the party needs to go further left?
I think there's a lot of issues right now with the Democratic Party. I'd be the first one to say it, but turning on each other does not help us move forward.
My thanks to Senator Slotkin for that conversation. The one thing she also mentioned was how she feels the honor of the office, and she's making it her mission to take a 20th century government into the 21st century. Her words. Back on Flashpoint with a pair of political powerhouses along with a lot more alliteration. Stay with us. Well, more big names join the mix of candidates this week as our ballots start to really take some shape. I've got a couple of well-connected political consultants to go through it all. Mario Moro of Mario Moro and Associates and Jason Rowe from Rowe Strategic. Guys, great to have you.
Thank you.
Let me start with the mayor's race. The Detroit News, a good article this week, and you were quoted all over it, Mario. And one of the
I thought I was running after I read it.
Well, the point you made was we're going to see who has street cred. So who has street cred with these candidates and who doesn't?
Well, right now they're all working on it, and I think that they've got to figure out how to raise some money to get that and get to that point. There's only so much money to go around. And with all the other races in the state, it's going to be tough. But there are a few candidates with some name recognition. There are some top candidates, I think, that are up there. I think we better keep our eye on Mary Sheffield and keep our eye on Ricardo's. I mean, not Ricardo, but Kinlock.
Jenkins?
Yeah, no, Kinlock.
Reverend Kinlock.
Yeah, and also Jenkins and Fred Durhal. So I think there's an opportunity, but they all have to prove themselves in the community and make sure that people know what they're about.
It feels really wide open. Something that stood out from reading that, a lot of them focus on the neighborhoods have been neglected. It feels like it's a theme. Jason, do you think that could indirectly actually hurt the mayor in his governor race?
I don't think so. I think that is very much a city kind of consideration. And, I was the consultant for the San Diego mayor for many years, and our entire campaign was built on restoring services to neighborhoods. So it is not unique to Detroit. I think often when you have big cities, a lot of the focus is on the core of those cities, and sometimes neighborhoods feel like they are excluded. I think that's a uniquely urban thing and unique to Detroit, but I also think that the Detroit story for Mayor Duggan is, a good enough story that's kind of thing I think he can move past. I will say, though, in the field of candidates, what's interesting is how different the identities of all these candidates are. Right. You've got a prominent pastor, you've got a prominent attorney, you've got a former police chief, a council president, former state legislator, now council member, so you've got an interesting array of people. Money will be important to elevate, but one person that people shouldn't discount is Chief Craig. One, he's the only Republican in a overwhelmingly Democratic city, but his profile is higher than any of those other candidates. So don't be surprised if he's able to put together a few bucks, he makes that runoff.
Funny you should say, because I got the sense from that article that you are discounting him a little bit.
Yeah, you can't figure out, what James Craig wants to be, a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, a police law enforcement person, a pundit. What is the guy, who are you looking out for, yourself or the people? It's all about ego, I think, in my opinion, with James Craig. There's no substance there. What are you running on? What's your agenda? What's your platform? It's all about, I'm Chief Craig. I solve crime in the city of Detroit. Well, in my opinion, he wasn't the best police chief in the city of Detroit. You've got some great police chiefs. You've had, Benny Napoleon, Warren Evans, Ike McKinnon. But there's no substance. I don't know why James Craig is running. And he is maybe the Republican savior for the city of Detroit. But then again, he couldn't even get on the ballot, right?
It's been a long time since a Republican made some hay in those areas. Do you think it's a stat that goes back to 1957? No sitting council person has won the race. Is that just an old stat at this point, or do you think that plays a role? It only affects Mary Sheffield and Fred Durhal.
A lot of city council folks have run for mayor and haven't been able to make it, but this is a different world right now. This is a different state. Mike Duggan is going to be a hard act to follow, and which is confusing to me about this whole let's bring the neighborhoods, because he's done an outstanding job with the neighborhood redevelopment and just reinventing the neighborhoods in the city of Detroit. So I don't know. They better change their messaging, Jason.
Well, and one thing I've noticed is nobody yet has positioned themselves as Mike Duggan's fourth term. And I think for voters and for the business community, that's what they're looking for. And nobody really has broken out and tried to establish that identity.
Could be effective. Let me ask you about the Senate race. Haley Stevens got in this weekend. I read one thing, someone calling her the presumptive favorite. You agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that at all. I think she is the establishment's favorite. I think she is Chuck Schumer's favorite. You have in Mallory McMorrow somebody on the progressive side, and I think unelectable in a general election, but who has been openly critical of Chuck Schumer. And so Chuck Schumer has a vested interest in making sure it is not her, and he has encouraged Haley Stevens. He was encouraging Kristen McDonald-Rivet, who ultimately took a pass. And then you have El Sayed in the race, who's going to, I think, take that field further to the left. And then you got Joe Tate as the lone black candidate, probably starts out with 30% of the Democratic primary voting base in the black community in Detroit, Flint, Saginaw, Lansing, Grand Rapids. That gives him a little bit of a base to start with. If he can raise money to take that a little bit further, he's going to be very competitive. But I think it's wide open right now.
You agree with that, Mark?
I would agree that it's wide open. I think you've got some very strong candidates. Stevens is strong. McMorrow is strong. El Sayed is is no stranger to politics. They all three have indicated and have shown in the past they're able to raise money.
Yeah.
Looking at this, big screen down, El Sayed and McMorrow may fight over the same group. That Rashida Tlaib group of folks, those progressives. So that might push, Stevens up a little higher because she is an incumbent congressperson.
It's also been a while since somebody ran from not being in the House first for Senate. Do you think that gives Stevens a leg up?
It gives her a leg up, as Jason indicated, with the established group, with the establishment. But, we've got a lot of time left. We've got 98 days from today before they can figure out who's going to make it through that primary.
Yeah, so a long time. And I should follow up with, are you hearing who might run for her seat? Because obviously the 11th is now up for grabs.
Yeah, where I live, so I'm paying attention to it. I know that the legislator out of Royal Oak, Jeremy Moss, is one person who's looking at it. I've heard a couple other names.
Yeah.
They're not
still early.
I've only heard Moss right at this point.
Yeah, Republicans can't win in that seat. I think Kamala won that seat by 18.5 points. So the redistricting, and it's interesting that you take one of the most affluent congressional districts in the country, and the way that redistricting commission drew it, it is going to be Democrat. I mean, I live in Bloomfield Hills, and I have zero Republican representation at any level aside from president, and I never will. I mean,
can I have a copy of that clip to run as a commercial for whoever I work for in that campaign?
Jason, let me ask you about the governor's race, too. Talk to me about the John James versus Mike Cox. Obviously, we could get more candidates, but right now, those two, how do they shape up against each other in your mind?
Well, let's not forget Eric Nesbitt, who was the first person to get in. So you have those three who are in. And some
Anthony
truck driver.
Hudson. Yes.
So we got three that are in. We have three that are talking about it, and I would say probably likely, and Tudor Dixon, Perry Johnson, and Kevin Rinke, three that ran for it 4 years ago, and none of them performed particularly well, whether primary or general. I think what John James is going to be competing with is less Mike Cox and more Mike Duggan, because the Metro Detroit donor base that has historically supported John James likes Mike Duggan. And I think they also like not having the stink of the Republican Party on them a little bit, so they can play overtly with Duggan. Cox, listen, he's got personal resources today that he didn't have many years ago when he ran, so he can self-fund to a degree, and he's indicated to people that he's willing to put in a couple million of his own dollars. I think he's going to struggle to raise money, particularly with John James in the race and with Eric Nesbitt. He's the Senate Republican leader. He's very well thought of by donors around the state, the grassroots, Lansing, so I wouldn't underestimate his impact, especially as the West Sider in that race.
And he also mentioned one of his things he's running on, eliminating the income tax.
Right.
Do you think that'll resonate?
Well, people like to hear that, but in the reality, you better show some numbers to figure out what you're going to do if you do eliminate the tax. I can't disagree with anything that Jason said as relates to those individuals running. I think John James is going to have a very tough time. He's going to have to reinvent himself, and I just don't know where his votes are going to come from. And I don't think they're going to just be solidly Macomb County. I don't know. He's going to be all split and going to be all over the map. Nesbitt.
And John starts out with higher name ID because he's run statewide twice, but also running in a competitive seat in Macomb. That means in 2 elections, he has spent millions of dollars in Metro Detroit, where most of the voters reside. So with name ID and a established fundraising operation, he's going to be competitive, but he starts out at his high point. And the only place he can go as the weeks go on is down, and other people will start climbing and eating into that lead.
Well, the next time we talk, gentlemen, I'm sure more of those names you mentioned will be in the race. We'll have a whole different discussion. Thank you so much. We're coming right back to finish up this edition of Flashpoint.
How about an NBA playoff edition of 4 Things in honor of the Pistons getting their first playoff win in 17 years? How about the top 4 Pistons playoff moments? Yeah, that's one of them. These are positive Pistons moments, by the way, so don't worry, you're not going to see Larry Bird in this segment. 2 of these happened in the same season, 2004, the going-to-work squad that would go all the way. A pivotal Game 5 in Round 2 saw the Pistons down 3, time running out until Chauncey Billups bangs it home from half court, and that's how you get the name Mr. Big Shot right there. Pistons would lose that game in triple overtime, but that shot reverberated, and the Pistons won the next 2 to advance to play Indiana in the conference finals. And that's where one of the greatest defensive plays in NBA history happened in Game 2. Pistons up 2 late. Indiana gets the ball on the break, up to Reggie Miller, and his easy layup is blocked out of nowhere by Tayshaun Prince. That sealed the win, and the Pistons went on to get that series and then the championship against the Lakers. Speaking of championships, it was 1990 in Portland, Oregon, when the microwave heated up in the 4th quarter of Game 5. Vinnie Johnson single-handedly shot the Pistons back in the game, and with the game tied, time ticking down, Vinnie drills the contested jumper with 0.7 seconds left on the clock to win the team's 2nd straight championship. And it was 2 years prior to that when it was Isaiah Thomas heating up with the title on the line. This was probably the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life. On a badly sprained ankle, Zeke scored 25 points in the 3rd quarter alone. Several off-balance shots falling out of bounds. The Lakers simply couldn't stop him on one leg, and were it not for the phantom foul, it would have been a championship-winning performance. That one's still tough to swallow. But alas, LA won that game in the next one, but the Pistons would get him back the following year for their first championship. You know who is reminiscent of that bad boys team? This year's squad. Hopefully, Caden Company can get it done against the Knicks later today at LCA. We're going to see what happens, and maybe that leads to some memorable playoff moments. Hey, that's our show for us today, everybody. Meet the Press coming up next. I'm Jason Colthorpe. See you later.